The world had fallen to ruin. The dead had risen and overthrown the living, transforming them into the walking dead. Cities were now nothing more than ghost towns, and the once beautiful countryside was now a wasteland of decaying corpses and shattered buildings. It had been 2 years since the outbreak began, and the last survivor was a woman named Letty. She had managed to survive this long by staying on the move, always staying one step ahead of the zombies that roamed the land. Letty had lost everyone she had ever cared about to the outbreak. Her husband, her children, her friends, all of them had either turned into zombies or been killed by them. She had learned to be tough, to fend for herself, and to always be ready for danger. Letty had been on the road for weeks, moving from one abandoned town to another, always searching for supplies and a place to rest. She was exhausted both physically and emotionally, and the weight of her loneliness was crushing. One day, as Letty was making her way through a small town, she saw a figure in the distance. At first, she thought it was a zombie, but as it got closer, she realized it was a man. He was walking slowly, shuffling his feet, and his eyes were unfocused. Letty approached him cautiously, but when she got closer, she saw that he was alive. He was malnourished and weak, but he was still alive. Letty took the man under her wing, and together they continued their journey through the wasteland. They scrounged for food and water, always staying alert for the danger that lurked around every corner. As they traveled, they talked and shared stories of their lives before the outbreak. The man's name was David, and he had been a doctor before the world fell apart. He had been treating patients when the outbreak began, and he had been forced to abandon his hospital and flee for his life. David had been on his own for weeks, and he was overjoyed to have found someone to share his journey with. Letty was equally happy to have found someone who understood the pain and loneliness she had been feeling. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Letty and David became close friends, and they relied on each other for survival. They encountered other survivors along the way, some of whom joined their group, but most of whom were killed by the zombies. One day, as they were walking through a dense forest, they heard a noise. It was a sound they had never heard before, a deep growling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. They stopped in their tracks and looked around, but they couldn't see anything. The growling continued, getting louder and more intense. Letty and David realized that they were surrounded by zombies, and they were in serious trouble. They had been caught off guard, and they had no idea how many zombies were closing in on them. They drew their weapons and prepared to fight, but they knew it was going to be a brutal battle. The growling was so loud now that they couldn't even hear themselves think. The first zombie emerged from the trees, and Letty swung her weapon, decapitating it in one swift motion. David was right behind her, his own weapon swinging in a deadly arc. The battle was fierce and relentless, with zombies pouring out of the trees in a never-ending stream. Letty and David fought with everything they had, their muscles burning and their hearts racing. As the battle raged on, Letty realized that something was wrong. The zombies were acting strangely, almost as if they were more intelligent than normal. Letty couldn't believe what she was seeing. The zombies were coordinated, working together to attack her and David. They were no longer just mindless creatures wandering aimlessly, but they were actually communicating with each other. David shouted to Letty,
"They're not normal zombies! They're different! We need to get out of here!"
But it was too late. The zombies had surrounded them completely, and the two survivors were outnumbered. Letty and David fought valiantly, taking down zombie after zombie, but there were just too many of them. The zombies were relentless, and they kept coming at them from all sides. In a moment of desperation, Letty remembered a rumor she had heard about a cure for the zombie virus. She had heard that there was a research facility in a nearby city that was working on a cure, but she had always dismissed it as just a myth. But now, with no other options left, Letty decided to take the chance. She yelled to David,
"We need to get to that research facility. Maybe they can help us."
David nodded, and together they fought their way out of the zombie horde. They ran as fast as they could, their hearts pounding in their chests, with the zombies hot on their heels. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the city where the research facility was supposed to be. The city was a maze of abandoned buildings and deserted streets, and they had no idea where to go. But then, they heard a sound that filled them with hope. It was the sound of a helicopter. They raced towards the sound, and they saw a military helicopter hovering above a nearby building. They shouted and waved their arms, hoping to get the attention of the pilots. To their relief, the helicopter landed, and the pilots motioned for them to climb aboard. As they flew away from the city, Letty and David looked down at the zombies below. They knew that they were the lucky ones, that they had escaped the fate that had befallen so many others. But as they looked at each other, they knew that they had a long road ahead of them. They didn't know what would happen next, whether the cure would work or if they would be infected forever. But they knew that they would face whatever came their way together. And so, as they flew towards an uncertain future, Letty and David held onto each other tightly, grateful to be alive and filled with hope for what lay ahead.